My uncle didn't laugh at the envelope. He did something worse. He looked at it, looked at me, and smiled the way you smile at a child who has just shown you a drawing they're very proud of. Patient, tolerant. The smile of a man who has already won and doesn't need to rub it in because the result speaks for itself. Well, Derek said, that's something. We were sitting in the offices of Hartwell and Associates on Stephen Avenue in Calgary, 8 of us around a table meant for 6 2 days after my grandfather's funeral. The building was one of those old sandstone ones in the downtown core, the kind that had been around since before the oil money changed everything about this city, and the boardroom had the particular smell of old carpet and recycled air and the weight of decisions that people would rather have made differently in hindsight. My grandfather, Gordon Beauchamp, had died on February 3, 2026 at age 80. He died the way he had lived, without ceremony. He went to sleep in the house on Pump Hill where he had lived for 38 years, and in the morning his neighbor, a retired teacher named Frank who had been collecting my grandfather's mail during the cold snap, noticed the lights hadn't come on. Gordon Beauchamp had run an engineering consulting firm for 30 years. He had built a career out of solving problems other people couldn't be bothered to figure out. In the end, he left the way he arrived, quietly and on his own terms. The will reading was handled by a lawyer named Patricia Hartwell, 58, silver-haired, the kind of person whose job has made her immune to the specific drama that erupts when families find out who got what. She read without inflection. She had learned long ago that adding any emotional color to these readings only made things worse. To my son, Derek Beauchamp, Patricia read, I leave my 70% ownership stake in Beauchamp Engineering Consultants Limited, including all contracts, client files, equipment, and goodwill. My uncle nodded. He had been the unofficial day-to-day manager of the firm for 12 years, ever since my grandfather pulled back from the field. Beauchamp Engineering did oil and gas consulting, regulatory compliance, site assessments, pipeline integrity work, annual revenue around $4.2 million. Derek had been waiting to put his name on the door since at least 2018. To my daughter Sandra Beauchamp Kowalczyk, Patricia continued, I leave the property at Gull Lake, including the cottage, dock, boathouse, and all contents. My mother, Sandra, let out a small breath she had been holding. The Gull Lake property was 45 minutes north of Red Deer, a 4-season cottage on the water with 3 bedrooms and a wraparound deck facing west. My grandfather had bought the land in 1989 for almost nothing and built the cottage himself over 2 summers. The property was worth somewhere north of $900,000 now. To my grandchildren, Wade and Amber Beauchamp, Patricia read, I leave the 2024 Ram 1500 TRX, the 2023 Chevrolet Silverado High Country, and the 2019 Airstream Globetrotter 27FB travel trailer to be divided as they choose. My cousins, Derek's kids, exchanged a look. Wade is 34 and works in equipment leasing. Amber is 31 and does marketing for a land development company. Both had spent the better part of a decade waiting for my grandfather to do exactly what he'd just done. The TRX alone is worth $110,000. The Airstream another $80,000. To my grandson, Patricia said, and the room shifted the way rooms shift when the last name comes up and everyone has already done the math and knows what's left. Nolan Beauchamp, I leave the contents of a sealed envelope, to be opened by Nolan alone, along with the following instruction. She looked up briefly, just a fraction of a second, then back down. Do not open this with them in the room. Go somewhere quiet, read it carefully, and trust me. Patricia slid the envelope across the table, white, letter size, sealed with tape. My name written on the front in my grandfather's handwriting, that particular all-caps printing he used, the kind engineers use when marking up drawings, precise and deliberate. The room was quiet for about 4 seconds. Then my uncle said, well, that's something. My mother said nothing. She was looking at the envelope, then at me, then at the envelope again, the way you look at something you're trying to decide is a problem or not. Wade pulled out his phone and started looking up TRX resale values. Amber asked Patricia about the process for transferring a vehicle title. My grandfather's family, the people he had fed and housed and driven to hockey and helped with mortgages and bailed out of bad decisions across 8 decades of living, began dividing things up before the meeting was even technically over. I picked up the envelope, put it in the chest pocket of my jacket, thanked Patricia Hartwell, and walked out into the February cold of Calgary, wind chill -27. The kind of cold that freezes the inside of your nose in 3 seconds and turns the city into a place only people who grew up here understand why anyone would choose to stay. I opened it in my truck, a 2015 F-150 with 178,000 kilometers on it, parked in the parkade on 8th Avenue, engine running, heat cranked, hand shaking more than the temperature explained. There were 3 things inside. First, a return plane ticket, Calgary to Tokyo Narita via Vancouver, departing February 12, 2026, 9 days from now, return open dated. Second, a handwritten note, 5 lines in my grandfather's printing. Nolan, don't let them make you feel small about this. I gave them what they asked for. I'm giving you what I owe. Go to Tokyo. A car will meet you at Narita. Show up, say less than you think you need to, and pay attention to everything. A man named Kenji has been waiting a long time to meet you. Tell him I kept my word, G. Third, photographed twice, the crease line soft from years of handling. Two men standing on a construction site somewhere. Hard hats, parkas, boots. One was my grandfather, younger, maybe late 30s, laughing at something. The other man I didn't recognize, slightly shorter, very straight posture, the kind of posture that suggests precision in everything, even the way he stands. They were both looking at something off to the left, out of frame, and whatever it was had made them laugh at the same moment the shutter clicked. On the back in my grandfather's printing, Kenji and me, Fort McMurray, March 1987, the day after. The day after what? I sat in that truck for 40 minutes. I read the note until I had it memorized. I looked at the photograph until the two men laughing stopped being strangers and started being a question I needed to answer. Who is Kenji? What happened in Fort McMurray in 1987? And what does my grandfather owe a man in Tokyo that he values more than the cottage and the company and the trucks? Let me tell you who I am, because it matters for understanding why my grandfather chose me, and why the choice looks like nothing until you understand everything. My name is Nolan Beauchamp. I was 41 in February 2026. I work as a journeyman pipefitter for a mechanical contractor out of Fort McMurray, 3 weeks in camp on a rotating schedule, then 1 week home in Calgary. I make good money by most measures, around $98,000 a year with overtime, but by the measures my family uses, I am the one who chose wrong. I didn't go to university. I didn't go into the family business. I went to NAIT in Edmonton right after high school, got my ticket, and started working in the oil patch at 23, the same age my grandfather had started in a different way 50 years earlier. My uncle Derek went to U of C, got an engineering degree, came back to work for my grandfather, and spent 20 years quietly positioning himself to inherit the firm. He married well, lives in Springbank, drives a Porsche Cayenne, and introduces me at family events as Nolan. He does the trades, with a tone that manages to make a $98,000 a year career sound like something you'd apologize for at a dinner party. My mother married Gerald Kowalczyk in 2001, a residential developer who builds infill duplexes in Inglewood and Ramsey, and has an opinion about every rezoning decision in the city. She hasn't worked outside the home since I was in junior high. She's not a bad person. She just measures the world in square footage and postal codes and the brand of vehicle in the driveway, and by those measurements, a pipe fitter who lives in a rented half-duplex in Coventry Hills will never quite add up. My cousins are what happens when a comfortable life removes all the friction that teaches you what you're actually made of. Wade once complained to my grandfather about waiting 3 weeks for a custom part for his boat. My grandfather, who had waited 18 months for a regulatory approval that nearly bankrupted his company in 1993, looked at Wade for a long time and said 3 weeks. Just that. My grandfather was the master of the two-word response that contained an entire lecture. And then there's me, the pipe fitter, the one who spent every Thanksgiving and Christmas and long weekend at my grandfather's house on Pump Hill because I genuinely wanted to be there, not because I was managing an inheritance. The one who drove up to Gull Lake with him every August to re-caulk the windows and re-stain the deck and fix whatever the winter had broken. The one who sat with him in the garage for 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon doing absolutely nothing in particular, just being there, the way you can be with someone when there's no agenda and no performance required. He was the only member of my family who ever made me feel like the choice I made, the trades, the oil patch, the work that leaves calluses, and the particular satisfaction of something broken now fixed, was not a lesser path but a different one, a legitimate one. One that he, the engineer who had spent 40 years on job sites with pipe fitters and welders and millwrights, respected as much as any degree on a wall. The guys who actually build things, he told me once, sitting on the deck at Gull Lake watching a thunderstorm roll in off the water, they're the ones who know what things are worth. Everyone else is just managing paper. He said it the way he said everything important, quietly, without drama, like he was observing a fact rather than making a point. I almost didn't go to Tokyo. I sat on that ticket for 2 days, going back and forth, because the envelope felt like a consolation prize, and the idea that a plane ticket to Japan could compete with a cottage and a company and 3 trucks seemed like a long shot. My mother called on the second day to check in, which really meant to calibrate how I was feeling about the will. He must have had his reasons, she said, in the tone people use when they're trying to convince themselves as much as you. He always did things his own way. I know. Are you going to go to Tokyo? I'm thinking about it. I just want you to be realistic, Nolan. Your grandfather was a private person. Whatever's in that note, it might not be what you're hoping for. What am I hoping for, Mom? She didn't have an answer for that, or she had one she didn't want to say. I went, because the note said trust me, and I had never refused my grandfather anything, and because whatever was in Tokyo had to be more interesting than sitting in a -30 city feeling sorry for myself. February 12th, Calgary International Terminal D, the Vancouver connection. I'd been to Japan once before, 10 years ago, a week in Osaka with a woman I was seeing at the time who had a conference there. I still had the passport. It had 3 stamps in it. The flight from Vancouver to Narita was 9.5 hours. I slept for most of the Pacific crossing and didn't sleep at all on the descent, because the window showed the coastline coming into view below, the dense pattern of lights and water, the geometry of a city that has been rebuilding itself for 80 years and still looks like nothing else on Earth. Narita Airport, Terminal 2, 4:20 p.m. local time, February 13th. I went through customs in my work clothes, jeans, a Carhartt jacket, the steel-toed boots I'd worn on about 200 job sites. I looked exactly like what I was, a 41-year-old pipefitter from Fort McMurray who had no business being in Japan for reasons he couldn't fully explain. In the arrivals hall, a young woman in a dark blazer was holding a white card, my name printed in clean block letters, Nolan Beauchamp. I walked up to her, that's me. She looked at me for a moment, the professional assessment, the slight recalibration of expectation. The expectation had probably been a suit, the reality was Carhartt. Mr. Beauchamp, welcome to Japan. My name is Yuki. I will drive you to Tokyo. Mr. Nakamura is expecting you. Thank you. Who is Mr. Nakamura? Yuki paused in that particular way people pause when deciding how much context to offer. Sir, he was your grandfather's closest friend. He has been waiting a long time to meet you. The drive from Narita to central Tokyo took about 90 minutes on the Higashi-Kanto Expressway. Japan in February is gray and bare and cold in a way different from Canadian cold. A wet cold, a city cold, the cold of 10 million people sharing the same narrow air. The highway passed through suburbs that turned into city that turned into more city, layer after layer, the density of a place that has figured out how to put more living into less space than anywhere else. I sat in the back of a black Toyota Century and looked out the window and tried to understand what I was walking into. Kenji Nakamura, the man in the photograph, Fort McMurray, 1987, the day after what? The car stopped in front of a building in Minato Ward near Azabu Juban, not flashy, a low-profile office building with a small brass plate beside the door that said in English and Japanese Nakamura Holdings, private. No lobby display, no reception theater. Just a quiet elevator and a corridor with dark wood floors and the particular silence of an organization that doesn't need to advertise what it does. A man was waiting at the end of the corridor. He was 78, shorter than in the photograph, with the posture of someone who has decided that exactness in all things, including how you hold yourself, is worth maintaining regardless of age. Dark gray suit, no tie, shoes belonging to a man who has had the same cobbler for 30 years. He looked at me as I came down the corridor, and his face did something I wasn't expecting. It recognized me. Not the way you recognize a stranger you've been told to expect. The way you recognize a face you've been carrying in your memory for a long time and have wondered if you'd ever see. You have his hands, Kenji Nakamura said in English with a slight accent softened by decades of international business but not eliminated. He used to say his hands were the most honest things about him. Yours look the same. You knew my grandfather. I knew Gordon Beauchamp for 39 years. I owe him everything I have, and I made him a promise. He extended his hand. The grip was firm and careful. Come inside. I have been waiting a long time to tell you something. He led me to a private meeting room overlooking a courtyard where a small maple tree stood bare in the February cold. He sat across from me, between us on the table, a pot of green tea, 2 cups, and a framed print of the same photograph from my envelope. 2 men on a construction site, both laughing. Fort McMurray, I said, 1987. Kenji looked at the photograph. March 1987. Your grandfather and I had been working together for 4 months. I was sent to Canada by my company, Nakamura Industrial, to manage a joint venture. We were building a processing facility for a Canadian oil sands company. It was my first project outside Japan. I was 39 years old and I did not fully understand what I was dealing with. He poured the tea with the unhurried precision of a man who long ago learned that rushing anything costs more than it saves. The project ran into problems, not technical problems, regulatory ones. A pipeline easement issue our head office in Tokyo had not properly assessed. The Canadian partner was threatening to pull out of the joint venture. If they did, Nakamura Industrial faced a $60 million CAD exposure on a project that had already spent $40 million. My company would survive, my career would not. I was the one who had recommended the project. I was the one who had said the regulatory risk was manageable. He set the teapot down. Your grandfather was the regulatory consultant on the project. He had been hired by our Canadian partner, not by us. He had no obligation to help me. Helping me solve our problem only made more work for him with no additional pay. But I went to his site office on a Wednesday afternoon and explained the situation, and he looked at me for a long time without speaking, the way he always did when he was thinking something through, and then he said, "Show me the drawing." Kenji paused. He worked on it for 11 days. He found a regulatory pathway our lawyers had missed, a heritage exemption applying to a specific section of the easement. He wrote the submission himself on his own time, working evenings in a camp trailer in Fort McMurray in March, which is not a comfortable place to be in March. The submission was approved. The project continued. Nakamura Industrial recovered its position. I went back to Tokyo, got promoted instead of fired, and over the next 30 years built Nakamura Holdings into what it is today. What is it today? I asked. Kenji looked at me steadily, a private holding company with interests in construction, infrastructure, real estate, and energy. Total portfolio value approximately $820 million Canadian. I set down my tea. Your grandfather, Kenji continued, was not merely my friend. For 30 years he was my most trusted advisor on Canadian business matters. Not officially, not on any contract. We had an agreement, his insight, my capital. He helped me understand how to do business in Canada with integrity. He introduced me to people worth knowing and steered me away from people who would have cost me far more than money. Several of the best decisions I have ever made, I made because Gordon Beauchamp told me to slow down. He never told me any of this. He wouldn't, that was who he was. Gordon did not help me because he wanted credit. He helped me because I was in trouble and he could see a way through it. The morning after we solved the easement problem, standing on the site in the cold, I told him I owed him. He said, "You owe me nothing." Pay it forward. I told him I would, and I meant it. Years later, I asked him what I could do. He said he would tell me when the time came. He told you. He called me in November 2025. He knew he was not well. He said, "Kenji, I have a grandson. He's a pipe fitter. He shows up to work on time, he doesn't complain, and he can look at a broken system and figure out what's wrong with it without needing someone to hold his hand. He's going to get an envelope at my will reading, and his family is going to make him feel like it's nothing. I need you to make sure he knows it isn't nothing." I pressed my hand flat on the table because I needed something solid under me. "The promise," Kenji said, "is this. I have established a trust in your name. It was funded on the day your grandfather died. The amount is $35 million Canadian. The courtyard outside was very still. The maple tree didn't move. $35 million, I said. A fraction of what your grandfather helped me build, an amount he and I agreed was right, enough to change a life without eliminating the need to build one. I looked at the photograph on the table. My grandfather, 39, laughing on a job site in the oil sands in March. The same boots he still wore when he came to visit me in Fort McMurray. The same all-weather parka. The same expression he had every time something broken was now fixed. "There is more," Kenji said. "Your grandfather's role was not only financial. He was my counsel on judgment, on character, on when to push and when to wait and when to walk away. He was the only person outside my family whose opinion I trusted completely. I need someone to fill that role. Not because I cannot manage without it, but because the quality of decisions improves when you have someone who will tell you the truth without wanting anything in return. I'm a pipe fitter." "I know," Gordon told me. He was very proud of it. He said the oil sands taught you something an MBA cannot, how to tell when a system is under too much pressure before it fails. He said it simply, without decoration. "I'm not offering you an executive position. You don't have the background for that, and I don't think you'd want it if you did. I'm offering you an apprenticeship, the same kind your grandfather gave me. In reverse, you would learn how this company operates. You would come to Tokyo for periods of time, travel to project sites, learn to read the business the way you read a P&I drawing, and over time you would become what Gordon was to me." "Why me? You could hire anyone, Wharton MBAs, Bay Street analysts." Kenji smiled, the first smile since I'd arrived. "Because your grandfather did not choose you for your credentials. He said you show up. He said you can sit in a room with a problem for 3 hours without getting impatient. He said you fixed his furnace 4 times without being asked and never sent him a bill." He looked at me. "I have worked with brilliant people my entire career, Nolan. Intelligence is common. Reliability is rare. Gordon had both. I am hoping you do too." "What about my family? They got the company, the cottage, the trucks." "Yes, let me tell you what they got." He leaned back slightly. "They got an engineering firm with $4.2 million in revenue and $1.8 million in outstanding receivables that Derek is slow to collect because he does not like difficult conversations. They got a cottage property with $14,000 in annual property taxes and a dock that needs $40,000 in repairs this spring. They got 2 trucks and a trailer that will cost $18,000 a year to insure between them." He paused. "And your grandfather knew all of this. He spent the last year of his life reviewing his estate specifically to ensure that what looked like the greater inheritance would be the more demanding one. He wanted them to have what they wanted, things with weight, things that need managing, things that depreciate. And he wanted you to have what he valued, a relationship, a second chance at something he built himself, and a future that doesn't depend on commodity prices. I sat with that for a long moment. The Gull Lake cottage with a dock that needs $40,000 in repairs, my uncle inheriting a firm with nearly $2 million in slow receivables he's been avoiding, my cousins insuring $110,000 worth of truck through an Alberta winter. My grandfather, who wore the same 3 flannel shirts from October to April and drove a 2012 Silverado with 240,000 kilometers because it still ran fine, had spent the last year of his life engineering a lesson in the difference between the appearance of value and the thing itself. I need to think about it, I said. Of course, take as long as you need. The trust is yours regardless of whether you accept the position. Gordon was very clear about that. The money is not contingent on my offer. And the position. The position requires one thing, that you show up, which is, as I understand it, what you do. I stayed in Tokyo for 5 days. Kenji arranged a room at a small hotel in Azabujuban, not grand, but quiet and good, the kind of place where the staff remember your order by the second morning I walked. I took the subway and got lost twice and found my way back by reading the station maps slowly and asking for help when I needed it. I sat in a ramen shop for an hour and a half watching the kitchen and thinking about a man who had spent his life solving problems in oil patch trailers in northern Alberta, and somehow in the process had built a friendship with an industrialist in Tokyo worth more than everything he left behind in Canada. I called my mother on the 3rd day. I needed to hear her voice the way you sometimes need a familiar sound to understand clearly what you're choosing between. Nolan, where are you still? Tokyo. Still, you've been gone 5 days. There was more to sort out than I expected. What kind of sorting out? The envelope was a plane ticket, wasn't it? You went, you saw whatever it was, isn't that done? Not quite, Mom. Well, what was it? What was there? A man Grandpa knew from the oil patch, an old friend. And it turns out Grandpa had been advising him for 30 years. Silence. What kind of advising? Business, investments, the kind of thing Grandpa was good at. Gordon never mentioned any of this. I know. More silence. I could hear her recalibrating, the specific sound of a person who laughed at something 3 weeks ago, beginning to wonder if she should have. How much, Nolan? There it was, not why did he choose you or what did he see in you or I'm glad you went. How much? It's not really about how much, Mom. Don't do that, how much? It's more than the cottage. The silence that followed was a different kind, not the silence of someone calculating, the silence of someone understanding something they cannot undo. He didn't tell any of us. He told me to trust him, that was enough for me. Why didn't he tell Derek? Derek spent 12 years building that company with him. Derek spent 12 years waiting to run that company his way, Mom, that's not the same thing. She didn't answer right away. I stood at the window of my hotel room, looking at the lights of the city going on in every direction, and I thought about my grandfather at 39, working late in a camp trailer in Fort McMurray because a man he barely knew needed help and he could see a way through the problem, and nobody paid him extra, and he never mentioned it to anyone, and he just went back to work the next morning like it was nothing. That was who he was, that was the whole story. When are you coming home? My mother asked. I'm going to stay a little longer, I have some things to work out. What things? Career things. She put the phone down. I don't know if she hung up or just set it on the counter and walked away. After a while, the call ended. On the 5th day, I went back to Kenji's office and told him I would take the position. When can you start properly? He asked. I need to go back to Calgary first, give my notice at the company, deal with my apartment, say goodbye to my grandfather's house before Derek lists it. Kenji nodded. Is there anything you need before you go? Actually, I said, and I almost didn't ask because it felt presumptuous, the truck, my grandfather's 2012 Silverado. I know it's not in the will, Derek will probably just sell it, but it was his truck for 12 years and it still runs and I'd like to have it if that's possible. Kenji looked at me for a long moment, then he picked up his phone and made a call, 2 minutes of rapid Japanese. He hung up. My attorney will contact your uncle this week and offer fair market value for the vehicle. The title will be transferred to you. You don't have to do that. Your grandfather drove to Fort McMurray in that truck twice to help me understand Canadian environmental regulations during a project in 2014. The truck has been to Fort McMurray on business more than most of my employees. It should stay with someone who will use it. I went back to Calgary. I gave my notice to the company. My site supervisor, a man named Terry who had been running crews in the oil patch since 1998, read my resignation letter and looked up at me. Tokyo, from the patch to Japan. It's a long story. They always are. He shook my hand across the desk. You were a good pipefitter, Beauchamp. You never called in sick and you never left a joint you weren't sure of. Whatever you're doing next, do it the same way. I said I would. I didn't tell my family about the trust. I didn't call Derek to explain. I didn't tell my cousins or send my mother a summary, not because I was hiding it, but because my grandfather hadn't raised me to perform. He'd raised me to show up and do the work and let the results speak in their own time. They found out in April, of course they did. Wade saw a photograph on LinkedIn, a commercial real estate developer that Nakamura Holdings had partnered with on a mixed-use project in Burnaby had posted a site visit photo. In the background, barely visible, a man in a hard hat and site boots stood beside an older Japanese man pointing at a set of drawings. The man in the boots was me. Wade sent it to Derek. Derek called my mother called me. Nolan, what is going on? Derek is losing his mind. I'm working in Japan, Mom. I've been trying to tell you. Working for who? A company called Nakamura Holdings, my grandfather's friend, the one I told you about. Derek says he looked it up. It's a very large company. It is. How did Gordon know someone like that and never say a word to any of us? Because Grandpa helped Kenji out of a problem in 1987 and never asked for anything in return, and Kenji spent 39 years looking for a way to pay it forward, and Grandpa told him to pay it to me. Silence. He helped someone 39 years ago and never mentioned it. That was Grandpa. I could hear her breathing, the particular quality of silence that belongs to a person standing in a cottage by a lake that needs $40,000 of dock work, understanding for the first time that the envelope was not nothing, that the envelope was by a considerable margin, everything. How much, Nolan? I'm not asking to be rude, I need to understand. I know, it's $35 million in a trust, Mom, plus a position with the company Grandpa helped build. The silence that followed lasted long enough that I checked whether the call had dropped. $35 million, she said. Yes. And an envelope was all he left you. An envelope and a plane ticket and a note that said, "Trust me." And you trusted him. I always trusted him. She didn't speak for a while. When she did, her voice was different. The calibrating tone was gone. What was underneath it was something I hadn't heard from my mother in a long time, maybe ever. He knew, she said. He knew exactly what he was doing. He always did. Derek called the following week. The engineering firm had a problem. One of their 3 major clients, an energy company that had been with Beauchamp Engineering for 11 years, had served notice they were reviewing all their consulting contracts. The relationship had been built on a personal connection to my grandfather, and Derek had failed to convert that personal connection into an institutional one before my grandfather died. The client had called Derek twice since February. Derek hadn't called back within 48 hours either time. They were talking to competitors. Nolan, I need your help. With what? You're in Japan now. You're working with an international company. These clients have expansion plans in Asia and they need... Derek. They need someone who understands the Japanese market and... Derek, stop. He stopped. I can't help you with this. Grandpa's relationships were his. He built them over 40 years by calling people back the same day and treating them like partners, not line items. I haven't earned those relationships and you haven't maintained them. That's not something I can fix with a phone call to Tokyo. Nolan, we're family. Yes, we are, which is why I'm telling you the truth instead of what you want to hear. You have a good firm. Figure out how to run it the way Grandpa ran it, or figure out a new model, but that's your problem to solve. He left it to you. I hung up, not in anger, with the clean feeling that comes when you've said the true thing instead of the useful thing, and you understand they are not the same. It's July 2026 now. I am in Tokyo. Japanese summers are humid in a way Fort McMurray never is. Heavy, close, the heat holding onto you the way cold in Alberta never quite lets go. I'm renting a 1-bedroom apartment in Meguro, small by Canadian standards, but enough, and I've learned enough Japanese to order food without pointing, and to understand approximately 1/3 of what my colleagues are saying, which they tell me is better than most gaijin manage in the first year. I work at Nakamura Holdings 4 days a week and spend 1 day a week on job sites, because Kenji agreed with me that a person whose value is in understanding how things actually work should not become someone who only looks at spreadsheets. I am learning, slowly. The way I learn to weld, not all at once, but one joint at a time, until the thing you're building starts to have a shape. Kenji and I have dinner once a week. Real dinners, not business dinners. He tells me things about my grandfather I didn't know, that Gordon had talked him out of a bad acquisition in 2009 that would have cost the company $120 million. That Gordon had flown to Tokyo on 48 hours' notice in 2018 when Kenji's wife was in hospital, and Kenji needed someone to play shogi with because he couldn't sit still. That Gordon had made Kenji promise if he ever came to Alberta, they would drive the Icefields Parkway together, just the two of them, because Gordon said it was the most beautiful drive in the world and he hadn't done it in 20 years. He talked about you every time, Kenji told me last week, not about the business, about you. He said the boy can look at a broken thing and not panic. He just gets quiet and figures it out. He said that was the most valuable thing he knew how to teach someone, and he wasn't sure he had taught it, that it might just be who you are. My grandfather's truck is parked in my mother's garage in Calgary now, a 2012 Silverado with 245,000 kilometers on it and a crack in the passenger side mirror he always meant to fix and never did. When I go back to Canada, I'll drive it. I'll take it up the Icefields Parkway, the way Grandpa said he would, and I'll stop where he would have stopped, and I'll look at the mountains the same way he looked at broken things, quietly, without panic, paying attention to what they're telling me. My family got things, a cottage, a company, 2 trucks, a trailer, things that need maintenance, things that cost money to keep, things my grandfather designed to be exactly as heavy as they looked, no heavier and no lighter, honest in their way. He gave me an envelope and a note that said, "Trust me." I trusted him, the way I always trusted him, the way you trust the only person in your family who has ever made you feel like the work you do is worth doing, who has sat with you in a cold garage doing nothing in particular and made you feel like that was exactly the right place to be. The envelope wasn't the consolation prize, it was the entire point. It was the key to something my family didn't know existed, opened by a man they had never heard of, across an ocean they had never crossed, in a city my grandfather had never told anyone about, honoring a promise he made on a job site in northern Alberta in March 1987 and kept without ever saying a word about it for 39 years. My uncle smiled at my envelope like it was a dog doing a mediocre trick. My grandfather left me everything he had learned. That turns out to be worth considerably more than a truck. My grandfather used to say that the most important tools are the ones you can't leave on the job site. They go home with you. They go with you when you change companies, change cities, change the whole shape of your life. They're not in your toolbox. They're in how you show up. I show up. I know now that's the whole inheritance. I just had to fly to the other side of the world to understand it.